Hello, Garland Nixon here. We're hanging out with Netfa Freeman, and he's with the Black Alliance for Peace. We're going to talk about what's happening in Africa. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here. We're hanging out with Netfa Freeman. Netfa is with the Black Alliance for Peace and PACA. Tell everybody about PACA.
Pan-African Community Action. We're a Pan-African revolution. I would say revolutionary Pan-African organization based in Washington D.C., building for community-based power, but from a African Pan-African ethos. So we assert that African people of African descent, wherever we are, but particularly in the United States, represent internal or domestic colonies subjugated by Western imperialism, in this case, U.S. settler colonialism. And then the way for us to liberate ourselves is to build community-based power, but that is connecting with our people and asserting the liberation of Africa as well, and an internationalism. So we're for the liberation of all oppressed people and see that all is interconnected.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, let's get talking. I know you, the Black Alliance for Peace. They do a lot of good work on Africa, a lot of good work in Latin America. I know you've been to Nicaragua and Cuba and Venezuela, and I know you sure you got a lot to say. But I might ask you a little something about Venezuela while we're there. I know you've worked with the good comrades in Venezuela, and they are being, truly challenged right now. All right, let's get going. We'll start here now. People can go for blackallianceforpeace.com. And to be frank, and most of my channel has been about, over the last couple of years, the Ukraine conflict. And it's very, very dangerous because of I've been particularly concerned because of the potential for nuclear war. But I really need to pick up, particularly more in South America, more in Africa and things like that. Particularly, I really haven't covered Africa. I don't know much about it. So I'd like to get going with that. Let's start here. The Black Alliance for Peace has a statement about something that happened just the other day. The U.S. airstrikes in Nigeria confirms why the U.S. Africa Command, AFRICOM, must be shut down. The U.S. airstrikes, and it was not clear, if it was not clear before the U.S. Africa Command Christmas Day bombing of its Sokoto state that Nigeria is not a sovereign African nation, but is instead a neo-colonial state with a Western puppet government. It should be crystal clear now. And, a lot of people don't know that the president of Nigeria was living in Chicago, and he was accused of being a drug dealer, which my guess is he probably was. And that is probably what allows them to have more control of him, because in the event that, he really is a drug dealer, they can just threaten him anytime he doesn't do what they want, which ain't going to be much. They could just say, we'll bring you back, and we'll, bring the charges for the various infractions of the law that you've been guilty of. Your thoughts on Nigeria?
Mm-hmm. Wow, there's a lot there. I think that also so one about neocolonialism and the sovereignty of the African countries and African nations. It is really about neocolonialism and the fact that a lot of African countries have a crisis of sovereignty, and the continuation of those structures, and that AFRICOM, the U.S. Africa Command, is in fact representative of one of the machinations of neocolonialism, the domination of other countries, the subversion and undermining of their sovereignty and their right to self-determination, the coveting of resources and the plunder, making sure that's sustained, and that any of these countries, any of these leaders, whether it be Tinubu in Nigeria or any of them. Talon in Benin and all that, are really dependent on an international global order. Their power rests in sustaining and allowing unfettered access to the West, to what we in the Black Alliance for Peace refer to as the U.S., EU, NATO axis of domination, that really has its I guess is even a military extension and of the former colonialism, the former Western colonization of Africa, that now finds root and ability through neocolonialism, through new forms of domination that have all the outward trappings of independence, but in fact everything is really controlled by them, the politics, the and the economy. And so whether Tinubu, whether he even had, if he even didn't have these drug charges type of thing and all of the rest, it doesn't really take that specific what you might call a string, or leash,
Leverage, maybe.
just
Yeah.
leverage to some for the leaders to act it. But yeah, so it doesn't take that, I mean, a lot of them are under the thumb and just have to do the same thing. Even the unrest in their countries, and there is unrest in a lot of these countries, and particularly Nigeria, they need protection to so they get the weapons from the West. They have, they get trained by, the AFRICOM. Pretty much the U.S. Africa Command depends mostly on the ground forces as proxy in these countries. We're not talking about a lot of U.S. people directly on the ground, troops and whatnot. They'll have military advisors and whatnot, and some presence, but for the most part, they are using the militaries of these countries, and that they will use them against their own people, especially if there's unrest. Now, and then there is also the issue that we well know that AFRICOM, the U.S. Africa Command, claims it's really trying to fight, and that is a extremist, violent extremism and terrorism that is a tribute to, and really is like this sort of I call it neo jihadist, because I think uh, jihadists in the sense that I'm trying not to disparage the integrity of Islam, because these are not forces that really representative of Islam. We don't. I think it would be Islamophobic and Western, uh, biases and prejudice to frame it that way. But there are these forces that claim and embrace Islam. They claim it, or they claim Islam, and that they are wreaking havoc and destabilizing Africa. And so AFRICOM, and then even the Western forces, French Foreign Legion or other NATO forces, come in and claim, well, we're trying to stabilize and wage a war. It's the war against terror in these countries, and without us, these countries would have be at the they'd have to surrender to these forces. And so there is that, and a lot of people don't know that that is a result. Also, it's something that the United States has been doing for a long time, in terms of a dual strategy of promoting this violent extremism on the one hand, or covertly doing that, and then on the overtly posturing itself or posing itself as the defenders and the combaters of violence. And they don't have to. In Africa, this manifestation of these, formations like Boko Haram, one of the largest ones in Western Africa and the Sahel. A lot of these groups across the Sahel were emboldened and even got were materially fortified by the U.S. destruction of Libya in 2011. And so while the United States doesn't necessarily have to have a direct, what we might call a smoking gun tie to these groups and guiding them and doing something indirect, they're emboldened, and that they know, and so that the United States can claim to be combating them, and that they know that they're really responsible for them, and that what they do in Africa, uh, really, they make fertile ground for these groups to recruit other people that are dissatisfied by their indiscriminate drone bombing or any kind of other operations. There's nothing there. Their solution is a military one, while these countries, that the neo-colonial countries, also fertile ground is provided for them by the dissatisfaction of the populations with corruption, with the misuse of their resources, with unemployment, all of these types of things, and the repression that's meted out to them. And so the terrorist groups can find recruits that way, and so they're so that's where that is. And I think that we have to look at what happened in Nigeria, which was on to go into that. That was on Christmas Day, actually, like
Right.
25th.
For people that don't know, talk about that bombing. What happened? Who was involved, etc.
Well, was the name Peter Hegseth and all that. That what the United States launched a bombing of what they were calling an ISIL, stronghold or something, and on December 25th. They've been climbing over some time now. I'm sure, I don't know if you talked about it on the show, but people may have been hearing the declarations that the persecution and even massacre or genocide they've even claimed of Christians in Nigeria, and claiming that and they're saying that the Nigerian government has been uh, either negligent or just not doing anything to protect the Christians there. They haven't said that you know how they do. They almost imply that it's a government supported or sponsored type of thing. But Tinubu and that regime is pretty friendly to the US, and that's what so they're really
Yeah, they
not
got a puppet. I'm just saying
they
this.
got a
They
puppet
have a
there.
puppet government in
Right.
there, and they're going to claim that the government that they put in place, that they fund, that they use to steal all the oil of Nigeria, is their enemy, and is on and is doing brutal, terrible things. That they have to come in.
Mhm.
That, you know what I mean? They got to come in. It's their government, and they're saying they've
Right.
got to come in and act because their puppets aren't doing what they want them to do.
That's
That
that's
doesn't
how
even
that's the
make
better way
sense.
to put it. So it was not quite exactly an enemy, but inept in doing what they need to do. And so when they promoted this, and then there are Christian evangelical groups in the United States that get emboldened by these types of things. They want to put off to the world this notion of um, Christians being targeted in different places around the world. So they start lobbying and doing things. And Trump, I understand that these people have their own close ties to this evangelical type right wing kind of thing, where we have to protect the Christian populations as must be protected the Jewish state of the so-called Jewish state of Israel, kind of a thing. So why are we, the rest of the world, those of us who are very adamant about our denunciation of the genocide of Palestinians by the Zionist state of Israel, why are these people like us promoting this anti-Semitism when there's real religious minorities around the world being persecuted, like for example in Nigeria, right?
But
So the government,
and might I add, the Israelis are bombing churches and killing Christians, but I guess we
right,
didn't notice that.
exactly. And then that's what they really depend on, the ignorance of populations in terms of the details and an analysis of what's going on. So we've always been fed the propaganda that the conflict, I won't even call it the genocide. I don't even
Right.
want to use those those terms. You see how the terms creep into us, even we
Oh,
don't even
yes,
want
yes.
but they've always tried to portray that as a religious issue as opposed to a political one, and promote Zionism, promote it as Jews against, Muslims against Jews, and that kind of thing, as opposed to what it is, settler colonialism and a persecution of a people, Palestinians whose land was stolen from them, who are also not just Muslim, but are also Christian. And I believe there's even those who subscribe to the Torah and mean Jews, but that's, we don't get that information. And while they might be majority, maybe, I don't even know I really don't know how much of the percentage of Muslims to Christians among the Palestinians is. I'm not really sure.
But there are various religions there.
Yeah, various
There's
religions among the
various
Palestinians.
religions throughout
There are
Palestine.
people, yeah. And
Exactly.
so, right, but anyway, that's the type of angle. And so let me go back. I don't know if I completely
Right.
described what actually happened in Nigeria. So they launched off of the in the it's the Atlantic Ocean. It's a aircraft carrier, whatever you call it, or ship off the coast of West Africa, and from there they launched into Nigeria, into the Sokoto region. Some bombing, some missiles, launched some missiles there in that Sokoto region, which is bordering actually Niger, which I think is significant. Niger is one of the country of Nigeria bordering Niger, one of the countries of the Alliance of Sahel states, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. But they launched this attack on Christmas Day, and then bragged about it and said, they were targeting ISIL, which has been, how they make their words, the scum and all that, who've been persecuting Christians, killing Christians and whatnot. And that's what they did. And then bragged about it on Twitter, on social media, and then of course announced it because it's a White House operation. And so That's what happened. And since then, of course, they just we don't. There's no what they destroyed there didn't seem to be an ISIL stronghold at all. A lot of a lot of damage. I don't really know of uh, casualties there, and I probably should know that, but I don't remember. But and that's what happened. And since then, a lot of information has been put out about it, or we can even say propaganda about it, but not a lot of clarity and not a lot of analysis about around what the motivations really could have been or probably likely to be. We know that the motivations are not to protect any kind of Christians anywhere. They don't have any kind of humanitarian characteristics that way. There's just there's no humanitarianness about U.S. Settler colonialism or NATO or Western Europe. These are the descendants or the successors of colonialism, the successors of genocides and plunder and war. They're the biggest threat around the world right now when it comes to waging war and destabilization. So that's what happened.
Yeah. And so talk about this. It seems to me, and there's some discussion of this, that, France, basically the Sahel states, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, they broke free. They're breaking free. They're in the process because, you're not completely free as long as they're lurking on your borders, as we see. Broke free from France. I was watching, I know, the CPI, Center for Political Innovation, they're putting out some pamphlets now, like a 3-year report on Burkina Faso, showing that now that Ibrahim Traore is in charge, all of the things that they've done, the roads they built, they're building power plants. Now that they have their money, all the things that he's doing for his people, for his own people. And I know Niger, they're mining their own gold now and selling their own uranium, and they have a chance, to have some level of success. But would I be overly suspicious thinking that these attacks in Nigeria could be related, or they could be starting to make the excuses to maybe attack some of the Sahel states?
No, not at all. I mean, I was certain this is what our statement looks at the kind of interest. We don't have any, like we said, that smoking gun that says that's really what was behind it. I think for sure we know that this egging on and the lobbying that was done by the evangelical groups, obviously, and then the what you call it bravado, claims of Trump, how he is. Wants to show that he actually means what he says, kind of thing. That obviously is a factor. We'd be fools to think that the United States and the West that has been concerned and admits their concern with the alliance of Sahel states and that self-determination, the projects of self-determination and taking control of their resources and those kind of things didn't have anything to do with it. Wasn't it? At least it had to be a consideration when they did it. They so you don't just do military operations like that and not consider all repercussions or advantages. What these things can have for them. Now, it's worth noting, in addition to the things you pointed out that those countries are doing, that just a few days or the December 20th, which is a few days before the U.S. strike, that the Alliance of Sahel States announced their launching of a joint regional unified military force that is meant to kind of do what they to strengthen what they already embarked on when they formed the alliance in the first place, a security alliance, a unified military force that's designed to better coordinate air operations, intelligence, and on the ground, operations on the ground and between the three countries, particularly around this question of the terrorism, which is plaguing all three countries. It's all across the Sahel, including Nigeria and whatnot. And so if a military force you would think that it's possible, it's very possible and plausible that the airstrike on that border, one is they could see, well, maybe we're gonna, see if we can frighten them a little bit, with something, but also feeling like if the Alliance of Sahel States and their joint military force and what they're doing can be actually successful in severely thwarting, repelling diminishing the ranks of the terrorists without the U.S. in the West having, being able to do it, because they haven't been able to do it. And we know that's the claim, that's the purpose of AFRICOM, one of the purposes of AFRICOM that they always claim. And then even the French forces, and then in fact, they were claiming that when they were expelled from these countries, that they weren't going to be able to do anything, and that this was a bad move because they'd be more susceptible and vulnerable to these forces. So if this unified force can do it and they can't, then that's going to, delegitimize their role there, and also discredit the fact, or expose the fact that Africa doesn't really need the United States and the West and the NATO forces to do anything. So we could, those things are, I guess some could say that's just a coincidence. It's impossible for them not to have thought about it when they made the strike. So that's that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, because they understand the importance of Africa. There's those resources. They're accustomed to for centuries, 4 centuries. When you really look at the numbers and you see some of these countries that get far less than 1% of the money. Some of these countries, they're selling gold, nickel, uranium, cobalt, everything you could possibly want. And the actual country gets less than 1% of the money. The rest goes to France, the rest goes to London, the rest goes to the US.
And then, France was, I think it was something really, I can't remember the exact percentage. You might remember that it was like 90%. Was it 90% of their uranium coming from Niger and coming from West Africa that they use to power the country. And so for them, we really have to understand that the continued exploitation of Africa and neocolonialism, and I mean, you might even dare say that it doesn't just apply to Africa, that continued exploitation is dependent upon the destabilization of Africa. It is dependent upon the peoples of Africa and the countries not being able to get themselves together, and not being able to have a real like people-centered democratic governance. Because if they had that, the people would not make the decision to sell off all of their resources to the West. They would take control of them and use them, and not and any export of those would want to have it on their own terms, and in fact probably even minimize or try to wean themselves off of some of the environmentally destructive extractive industries that have been fueling the West and the global economy for so long. And so they have to depend on us, having been in disarray and not getting ourselves together. I say we because I identify with the global South, and I do. And then in the Western countries, or being an American, like, we come from that. I come from that Malcolm X thing. We Africans, and that we're the victims of Americanism, and that we're subjugated here. I think it's important for us to understand, and they do a lot to make sure we don't make these connections and to try to beat back the type of affinity and political understandings of the Pan-Africanism that we used to have back then, that was emerging during the 60s, 70s, and even 80s, that we were embracing and understanding our connection to other peoples, particularly peoples of African descent around the world, and identifying in a way that says, well, when they attack Venezuela, for example, or when they bombed, destroyed Libya, or for example, these kind of things, that we see those things as counterpart and similar actions of when they send the National Guard into our communities, when they beef up the 1033 program, when they create policies that are targeting our young people in DC, like the crime bill, and things that are encouraging mass incarceration, and the misuse or the taking away of social services, so they can divert funds to something else, because we don't care. We don't need health care. We don't need none of that. They need to have those things to fuel the international finance capital and also the military industrial complex. So when we put all those things together, when we internalize that as a people, it weakens their agenda, and weakens their pursuit of global domination. And so we have to, if we see ourselves, and we should see ourselves as a pocket, as a manifestation of the global South, particularly African led global South, but within the bowels, well, I say the bowels of the settler colonial state, the US, not Americans, but actually Africans and also other identify with as other people as internationalism, because we're not trying to be, any kind of race chauvinism type stuff, but we're trying to be revolutionary. Then it weakens them and we'll act differently too. The kind of indignation there's an indignation we should have as a mass when they kill these people indiscriminately in Venezuela like they're doing, with these bogus claims that everyone knows it's false. The UN and just got finished denouncing it as these are war crimes they're doing, crimes against humanity. They're, all of the nations are voting for that emergency meeting, and that we should feel so indignant that there should be protests in the street around this. There should be, they shouldn't be able to get away with it, and we should be feeling like they just attacked us. And also the same affinity. And this is one thing, if you allow me this, in the statement that we promoted, and I think I want to encourage people to visit blackallianceforpeace.com, where the statement we put out on this about AFRICOM, and want to go into AFRICOM in a minute, where you're saying that they're killing Venezuelans. In the statement we talk about how it's been easier for them. They would rather not directly attack the lines of Sahel states, any of those countries right now. But we know that they'll do something like that. They did in 2011 against Libya. They'd rather not do that right now because of an affinity that has grown, particularly centered around the personality of Ibrahim Traore, Captain Traore, but still kind of extends past into the country of Burkina Faso and also by extension to the lines of Sahel states. So something like that, we should be able to kind of crystallize that, concretize that into us identifying with all of Africa and the rest of the global South, and be ready to respond if they were to attack directly, the one of those countries, and not have to be able to claim that it was against some terrorist thing, and with the cover of claiming like they did in Nigeria that it had the approval of the Nigerian government. They do this in Somalia all the time. They do all this drone strike, killing Somalis and doing drone strikes, and they always when they announce it, they say, well, we had we're working with the Somali government. This isn't approved by the Somali. So they don't. This is different than directly attacking the state of Burkina Faso, of Niger, of Mali, like they did with Libya, which we didn't respond then. But hindsight is 2020. A lot of our people will look back and say that was wrong. They are doing that. If they did that today, it would be a different question. Not that they wouldn't do it, but they have to think twice. So maybe they'll do it off the coast, claim that they're fighting terrorism. Today, they're able to get away with just reckless, and just so disregard criminally killing, Venezuelans, and other people in the Caribbean. This because not just Venezuelans.
Yeah, Colombians, other people, just anybody that happens to be on a boat that they call a drug dealer.
And they're allowed to get rid of it, get away with it now because they've been, I think, a lot of the conditions and the propaganda over time has whittled away at our sense of affinity with or kinship with other peoples in the world and the global South. They do a job. Propaganda does a job. It's like what Malcolm X when he refers to Americanism and this notion that there is American identity that we can identify with, that's in our best interest. We're Americans, so to speak, as opposed to subjugated people of this really what is really an extension of Europe. It's really a white supremacist Western, dominated, thing that's really of settler colonialism and capitalism and patriarchy that really does not include us, but does depend on many of us just being so confused that we identify with it anyway. And so, that it depends on us being that, because then they can do different things like what they're doing in Venezuela, and we don't even respond or think of it as something done against us. In fact, we'll identify with the perpetrators of these acts first because of the confusion.
Well, if I could, I'll say this. I get calls. We both have Douche Do Radio on WPFW. I get calls sometimes with Black people that make my head shake. I get Black people calls. What, for one thing? Oh, what is all this Russian propaganda? And I'll say to them, well, wait a minute. They attacked Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Paul Robeson. They ran W.E.B. Du Bois out of the country. Every black person that stood up against the U.S. empire, they called him some kind of a Russian spy or a Soviet spy or a communist and ran him out of the country. I said, I'm proud. I'm nobody if you don't call
Right.
me. If you call me the same thing that they call Paul Robeson,
Mhm.
Malcolm X, or King, well, then I'm personally happy. But this is the black person calling in. It's black
Mhm.
person calling in. Yes, our enemies, Iran, Russia, North Korea. I said, our enemies? Iran
Right.
and Russia and North Korea are getting beat down by the same speculative capital, finance capital people that are beating down the Americans right
Right
here,
here.
that have taken, that made it so people can't afford a house, they can't
That's right.
afford a car, they can't afford anything. They take you to the cleaners, and then you identify with the people at Citibank and the people at
Right.
Lockheed Martin,
Mhm.
and say our enemies are Russia and
Right.
Iran. And so, that's why I say we've got, sadly and unfortunately, black folks in this country that are so brainwashed that
Mhm.
they think that the enemies of the Atlantic Council, the enemies of the Rothschild Bank and all of these other banks, that's our enemies. It's a sad state of affairs.
Mhm. It is, and it's a sad state. And then we also have to remember it. That is there's a lot of media and propaganda used to create that. To create that
Mhm.
kind of mentality. It's only like media stuff that like this show and other responses that we can get together and do because the internet has kind of had a few unintended consequences for them.
Yeah.
And so we could, and we, like you said, we have our show on WPFW, which is a people center, I think, a people center outlet that pushes back. But it's only with those and our megaphone and our voices are so small compared to all of the myriad of ways that they can propagate their messages. Hollywood, CNN, all these kind of things that they can put out there that even just slip in little subliminal. One just will say out a straight out lie too, but then other words, planting other little seeds. I remember, and this is an old thing that I can remember. I'm sure I probably just using a more updated uh thing. But I remember that movie with Jack Nicholson and Tom Cruise, A Few Good Men.
Yes.
And so, and I remember this was way back because back then I was already doing. I had been to Cuba already and just doing a little stuff. And they just, the movie ain't about Cuba, nothing, right? It's just about some, like a murder plot mystery
Right.
or thing, right? But then all they do, I remember hearing them make the little remarks. Oh, you might want to take those insignias off your thing because they Tom Cruise and people just arrived at Guantanamo Bay. One, you don't even get a sense of what the hell Guantanamo Bay is.
Right.
That kind of offense that they even exist on Cuban territory, a whole U.S. base just taking up, a place in Guantanamo in Cuba, the province in Cuba, and they're unwanted by the people of Cuba and Guantanamo, obviously. But then he says you might want to take those, insignias off because the Cubans like to take pot shots at people who are, they think are important or somebody important or something like that. How absurd is that? I mean,
uh there was a show called, I could go on, there's a show called 24, Jack something or other. And
yeah.
so this whole series of shows was him trying to stop terrorists from Venezuela who had was going to blow up a nuclear bomb or something. First of all, we're
Mhm.
terrorizing Venezuela, but it was
That's
terrorists
right.
from Venezuela, and Venezuela doesn't have nukes. We do. So it was like we took the things that we're doing, turned it around backwards, and said Venezuela's doing it to us. We had there was a zombie movie called World War Z. And in the zombie movie, they're like, oh,
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
well, yeah,
I never saw.
what are we going to do? And how are we going to deal with it? And they said, oh, you have to go to a country that's figured it out, Israel. And he goes to Israel, and Israel has built a wall. But the wall wasn't to keep the Palestinians out. The wall was to keep the zombies out. And in this, they were so kind that all of these Arabs, they allowed him to come in with Israel so they could be safe from the zombies. So Israel did everything. They built a wall for good reasons to save people. And then and I'm like, oh, come on, this is pure propaganda.
Propaganda.
Pro-Israel. Now the
Mhm.
Israelis are saving the Arabs, and boy, we sure are glad they built a wall. So
Mhm.
you watch this crap, and you're like, but I did want to ask you
The
this,
good
and this
Arabs.
is important. Benin. I understand something about a regime change operation. I don't know who was the good guys, the
Mhm.
bad, what happened, where the imperialists were, what happened in Benin.
And so the dates come. This was early, and it wasn't too long ago. It was before Christmas, and so in Benin there was a military. It was an attempt of a coup against the Talan. I'm blanking on this president's name. Another one of the compradors in Benin. The military. Was in an operation to overthrow, commit a coup or execute a coup d'état against the country. And I think they even were declaring, of course, saying what, which is not really atypical, that is because of the, the unresponsiveness of the government and whatnot, which of course the West is going to be like, oh, that might be another Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger thing, right? And Burkina and Benin is bordering. And so, uh, and to overturn it, they actually took power. And the French, you know, uh, got together with and communicated and used Nigeria and Nigerian forces to go in there to go in and overturn the coup. And then actually even Western French forces came on after there was overturned, came down. They were reluctant to step foot there because of course the French are pretty unpopular by the masses, but they did end up sending some troops there to secure things or to find out, make sure everything was together. But isn't the whether the troops are there or not, that's neither here nor there. The point is that it was French who worked with the
Nigerians.
Nigerian. I'm trying to think of a term to call it, subservient, something, some kind of bootlegger, to overturn the coup. Which so that's what happened, and of course those officers have been arrested, and even now, right now, that government has been waging a campaign of against any opposition forces that they claim. Then they've been arresting people, and I understand even some people have gotten killed now as a result of what happened there. So, and actually, oh no, I was getting ready to get mixed up with the Gabon, but yeah, that's what has happened there, and we know. I think it's relevant to what we are talking about here with Nigeria, because one, it shows the subservience and of not subservience in the tool, the role that Nigeria has been playing for at the behest of the neo-colonial powers, the Western powers. And it also shows the concern that the Western powers have about the maybe the even the possibility, any possibility of an expansion in addition to the AES, the Alliance of Sahel States. It's a French acronym. I don't know what the line, what the real words are, but any expansion of that, and also or any potential of some other type of just anti-Western, emergence of some kind of anti-Western force in West Africa or anywhere in Africa.
I did want to ask you about Somalia, Somaliland. I
Yeah.
know that, and what I always tell people, if anytime you want to figure out what's going on, anytime you see a war or anything else, always look at a map, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so what I tell people is, let me bring this map up, and you'll kind of see after, the U.S. and their buddies got their butts handed to them in the Red Sea by the Yemen. So here we have the Red Sea, right, and there you have Somalia, and there
Mm-hmm.
you have it right at the entrance to the Red Sea. What you have to understand is there is the Gulf of Aden, so that is controlled by Yemen, and so what you have is over here you've got the Persian Gulf, where the Persian Gulf, most the choke point is controlled by Iran. Now you go right over to the Red Sea, which is the entrance to go up to Europe through the Suez Canal, and the Yemen government controls that. So the U.S. and the Brits, etc., are looking at the entrance to the Red Sea, figure out how they can get it. Not only that, apparently the Israelis want to build a base there that makes it easier for them to attack Yemen, and easier to attack some of the other closer countries and do their dirt in the Red Sea. So what's up with Somalia, Somaliland, and of course the Zionists claiming they want to put a base in there, or being the only that's a giveaway. When the only country in the world that supports something are the Zionists, they're up to no good.
Well, you kind of almost answered some of the question in terms of, at least in terms of the interests, that are there. And then Somaliland it's a succession movement of Somalia wants to break away from the the established Somalia territory of Somalia, the nation of Somalia. It's not recognized by any other bodies in the world, like you just said. You know, the Israel, which is also not recognized by a few countries too,
You're
right?
right.
And that it's only that in fact, so that's just Zion, so it's not even a UN recognized one, and that it's also the Somalia and is concerned because of what you just said in terms of the significance of that breakaway secessionist movement. Its claim, that it's a persecuted one. I don't really the more details that I'm not clear on that, but we know that they have been fighting for, and even have reneged on some promises of in terms of trying to smooth over the tensions between Somalia and Somaliland. As you can see there, also
It's
Djibouti was just,
obvious.
yeah,
It's,
it's
it's
obvious
obvious. It's right at the mouth of the Red
right
Sea. After they got their butts handed to them, and they found out that the Red Sea could be controlled by Yemen and its allies, they said, "Okay, we got to do something. We'll break off a piece of Somaliland, and
right.
then, from then on, where we can use that to put our bases in, and we can launch our attacks on Yemen." From there, the
Mhm.
next game is to from there is to, once they get established there, they can use that to attack Yemen and try to take the Yemen government out and regain control of the Red Sea.
Right. Mm. So that's pretty much, I mean, you've answered the question there in terms of, and the background is that this is not a, it's suspect. It's not, there's no, um, as far as I understand, it's not a question of being a persecution of a people in Somalia by the Somali government. In fact, the Somali government has been strapped with trying to deal with Al Shabaab, another creation like Boko Haram. Well, Al Shabaab is not really, that's not exactly true. Al Shabaab did emerge before these things with Libya and whatnot, out of a different set of circumstances in Somalia, but it's turned into one of the more extremist groups of how it's doing things. And and it's a Sharia, one of those Islamic fundamentalist groups. But then United States, what it does is it has in this claim, a quest to fight terrorism, whatnot, is constantly drone bombing Somalia. And so Somalia is still the government there is considered a Western, I guess supported by the United States. And every time they drone bomb the country, they make sure they put out a statement through AFRICOM that says that they've been doing it in coordination with the government there, and with the permission of the government there, like they try to do with we see that with Nigeria. And so we're not so the US is in a bit pretty much of a it's an interesting, delicate place for them, because I don't think they have any issues with they wouldn't necessarily have any issues with the recognition of Somaliland, but at the same time, they don't go ahead and openly support it because of the relationship they have with the Somali government.
Well, wait a minute. There's we can look and see that Google has all kind of wonderful propaganda. Look here. Medical ties link Israel and Somaliland years before formal recognition. The Israeli NGO Save a Child's Heart. They have an NGO, Save a Child's Heart. That's the Israeli NGO, has provided cardiac care to children from Somaliland. Oh, look at that. There's an Israeli person, and there's some little Somalian children. I guess and look, she's got a little thing, Save a Child's Heart. Isn't that nice? The propaganda, you have to laugh when you see this kind of propaganda. They're literally dropping bombs on tents with children in it, burning them to death, slaughtering, murdering them, shooting them right between the eyes, the most horrific acts that a humankind could ever imagine. And because they put a picture of a Zionist child, kid with a couple of black kids on her hip, on either of her hip, all of a sudden they're the savior of Somaliland.
Yeah, I mean, the propaganda is fierce. They have to keep up the propaganda because it, in terms of what's happening with the the global South, the dispositions of power or their power arrangement, the West is not really winning that. They're losing in a lot of ways. And so, but it's, and this losing is why we're seeing many more beefing up of military and physical, threats and things around the world, is because this is all they know. The time and of Western capitalist domination has run out, and they're in their desperate pursuit to regain that, and they do it by, and so it's really unfortunate that most of us all have to bear the brunt of their desperation and their, inhumanity, both globally, particularly the global South, but even, domestically within the United States. I think it's time for us to kind of get ourselves together and call for some unity, and organize ourselves to be able to survive and withstand all this, and at the same time broaden our purview, so it's truly internationalist and Pan-Africanist. So, calling this stuff out, we got to call it out, and then we have to, challenge, our subjugation.
Save a child's heart. Well, we know that the Zionists have been into organ trafficking, so I guess they it makes it. Look, I wouldn't want to come anywhere near. I wouldn't want to come anywhere near that NGL. NGL. Yeah, I think I know what they mean when they say save a child's heart.
No, that's funny.
It's absurd. Before we go, your thoughts on one last thing on Venezuela, wherein it seems to me, I've said this, I think that the Trump administration finds themselves in a trap, because the people of Venezuela have been armed, and they're, have a revolution, the spirit of revolution, and they're saying, all right, Americans, you come on here, we're ready to fight. So the Americans, 16,000 soldiers, they can't ever go on the ground, because the military will fight, and the people of Venezuela literally are armed. The people are ready to fight.
Right.
And you have people from other countries saying, we'll cross the border if the Americans come in. You got people from other places in South America saying, we will cross the border and we will join the Venezuelans. Give us a gun. Give us something to defend ourselves. We'll help defend Venezuela. And I think the Americans know they can't bite that one off. And I think they're in a trap, because he's there. All he can do is murder fishermen in boats, but he can't attack Venezuela. And if he leaves, even now, because the U.S. administration, the U.S. government said, we're going to take their oil. If they leave in humiliation, but they can't stay there forever, and they can't attack. So they've set themselves up, if you ask me, for a humiliation. Not that we can ever underestimate what they'll do, but I don't see how they can go in. And when they leave in humiliation, because they said they were going to take the oil, and they leave without the oil.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that there's really not another outcome, but unfortunately, because this administration, the way it talks, because it's carrying out a bipartisan agenda, though. But
exactly.
the way they talk, and the kind of that hard line stuff. First, it's supposed to be killing and targeting narco traffickers and whatnot, and then they come out blatantly be like, well, with these claims that this is our oil, and he's just kind of gangster stuff. Like you said, there's no way to win any kind of ground operation on the ground there, and they, I suppose they know that. I mean, I don't know if they can do that really. There's few places they really could win any kind of ground war. That's why the United States resorts to what it does with aerial bombings and drone strikes and missiles, which it's really makes them more dangerous in a lot of ways. Because if we've seen in the last wars, like if we say to Libya or even Iraq, they will clear out things. They will start with a very destructive and lethal, aerial assault. Or some kind of assault from maybe what you call it, a coastal line or something like that, before they send in the ground troops. And so they try to do that first, which makes it a very dangerous situation. There was and then you also, like you mentioned them seizing this oil tanker, and just keeping it, and you're keeping the tanker, keeping the oil, and a very gangster move that has been widely condemned around the world. So all the claims right now seems that the United States is just all gloves off, doesn't care. They don't care that the lies they tell are completely baseless, and they don't care about having to prove them anything like that. The claims that they make. And recently, was it yesterday or the day before, they launched the airstrike on a I think it was a coastline, Pacific coastline, claiming that they were targeting some sort of drug off of supposedly a port that had some uh, a warehouse or some kind of manufacturing thing for drugs or something like that. This particular thing, we don't really. It seems that it can't be verified by the United States, or it hasn't. They don't even try to provide any kind of evidence. I would think that if they did it, they would provide evidence. But also, the Venezuelan government hasn't said anything that confirms what happened, anything that happened there.
Yeah, I'm
And
not
so
even
it's weird.
sure. Yeah, I'm not even sure it's not just propaganda and lies. I don't
Right.
know what they're doing because I
Yeah,
don't trust them.
exactly.
You know
None
what I
of
mean?
us.
They may say they blew up something they didn't.
Mhm.
Let me,
Right.
before we go, I do want to ask you something. Speaking of puppets, Zoran Mamdani. We're told, oh yes, and I know so many people. Oh man, he's the blah blah blah. He's going to make a change, and I'm like, I never trust him for beginning. Now listen to this. This is they ask him, hey, what do you think about Venezuela, Cuba? This is Mamdani. I want to be clear on where I stand. I believe both Nicolas Maduro and Miguel Diaz-Canel are dictators. Their administrators have stifled free and fair elections, jailed political opponents, and suppressed the free and fair press. Well, he leaves out that the political opponents were US CIA puppets and operatives trying to overthrow their government. Why wouldn't they jail them? The
Mhm.
so-called free and fair press were NGOs sponsored and paid for by the CIA in their countries, advocating for the overthrow of their government. Dictators, Maduro got 64% of the vote.
Right.
So I listen to him and I'm like, what differs what Zoran Mamdani is saying from what I can read at CIA.gov?
Right. Or any of these career politicians that take up this. Oh, maybe I don't want to make such a sweeping condemnation. A lot of the career politicians that take up the run or the kind of label of democratic socialists, but it's like, the party, this is a duopoly. The political structures of Democratic Party or Republican Party, in terms of that dominate that duopoly. Of course, other people and other parties, anybody or parties can run, but it's almost like an exercise that you have to use it for movement building or something like that. Where in this country, the elections are more of a personality contest thing. And
Right.
so if you win, you're winning on personality. You're not winning on a platform that's, a particular platform that is backed up by a party with real, that's not part of the capitalist infrastructure podcast. And then the Democratic and Republican Party is propagated almost like people don't even see anything else. Mandami knows, and just all of them know, because of AOC, or it was Alexandria
During
Ocasio-Cortez, and
AOC,
all.
yeah,
She did the same kind of condemnation. They have to distance themselves from, if they're claiming socialism and democratic socialism, then women say, but not that kind of socialism, right?
right.
Is that got it? Because that is the third rail of politics, to be to identify yourself or claim or embrace a real revolutionary process. And so they have to, and so once you declare being any kind of socialist at all, the establishment's going to jam you up and try to jam you up on that. So you got to make it very clear that I'm not that kind of socialist. And so it shows us, though, where the person stands. We got to be sophisticated enough politically to understand, once you denounce Venezuela and Cuba and these countries, then that's what you're doing. Like you said, 64% of the vote, this is Nicolas Maduro, and not to mention that they have the right in Venezuela and in Cuba and in Nicaragua. They have the right to national referendum. They don't just vote for some kind of representative. They can actually choose. The people are able to choose policy and laws and stuff by vote. We don't have that here. No candidate, particularly on the presidential level, has gotten 64% of any kind of.
Well, you know what is a dead giveaway? Here's a dead giveaway. The Maduro government is handing out guns to people.
Right.
And they're giving the citizens, here's a gun, and we're going to train you on this gun, and we're going to give you ammunition. So when the soldiers get here from the empire, you can defend your country.
Right.
If he was a dictator would never give the people guns, because they would point them at him. The only reason they're giving people guns is because those people know which direction to point the guns. So it's absurd to say, oh yes, he's a dictator. The people hate him, but he's giving them guns and arming them. That
That's
is the opposite of what any dictator would ever do.
You're right about that. That's a good point. I'm going to bring that up. I'm going to steal that from you. I didn't even think about that, but that's a good point. In this country, they got so much confusion around access to guns. And when they talk about, the gun, the right to bear arms and everything, that's a particular class and race that they're
Yeah.
talking about. That ain't all of us. They don't want all of us. But they've also induced such a confusion, a political confusion around us that we are, there's intercommunal violence in our communities and urban communities. And so, the solution to me, and I hope I'm not being too bold, is not the solution. I shouldn't say that. The problem is not that our people have guns. It's a problem we're not clear politically, and then we have hatred and whatnot, and so we can turn things on ourselves, because clearly just by having a gun is not the problem. And I know it sounds to some people like that that right-wing Republican, well, what is it? Guns don't kill people, people do, or something like that. It might sound like that. I don't, there's a little bit of legitimacy to that. There are people with guns that don't go around just killing people. So the issue is not that people have guns. And our intercommunal, the problems with our intercommunal violence are something distinct. But in terms of what your point is, in terms of the dictatorship and proof that we got to do a little more critical thinking. If people knew that they were giving, actually, because that's kind of been put out there that they're giving out, and people
You got to think about that. A dictator giving them guns, they shoot him immediately. In America, they ain't worried about you having guns, really, because you don't know where to point them.
Exactly.
You point them at each other and shoot each other. You're not going to point them at the people that are still. You're not going. I ain't saying you should go point them at Wall Street. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying they're not worried about you going to Wall Street. It's like when I'm on the radio and I say, my enemies are not in Russia. My enemies are not in Beijing. My enemies are not in Tehran. My enemies are on Wall Street and Silicon Valley and Capitol. Not that I'm not advocating. I don't believe in violence anyway. I believe in defending yourself, but I don't believe in, just going out and shooting people. Because the system loves violence, because if I would go out and start shooting them, that gives them the excuse to then crack down and use violence. I'm just saying they're not scared of Americans having guns, because Americans don't know what direction to point them. So they're like, go ahead, take the guns. All you Americans shoot each other, and we'll just sit up here and cash in anyway.
What you just articulated is basically the same thing I asserted in the beginning about that it depends on Africa's destabilization. So basically, you're saying the turmoil of the people, that they depend on us here being, not being clear and, being disorganized and what you call it, confusion, politically confused. And so it's the same thing there. Some form of destabilization, confusion, and all that is, how they rip us all off.
Keep the working class fighting amongst each other. So all the working class have guns. They're going to shoot other working class people. You know what I'm saying? They ain't going to realize. They tell us everything, but you can't talk about class in America. When you start talking about economic class, that's when the problem. That's when you get thrown off of TikTok and stuff like that.
That's right. They don't even care about something. And not that there aren't. I think race is a construct, but it is something that exists. So it's not that. But I'm not. If we talk about race, they don't care if it's talking about race, because race it's confusion. You can use it to confuse people. Oh, I'm pro-African or black, so that means I must be anti-white or anti-U. That's not what's happening here. There is something that we have to kind of muster and pull ourselves together, maybe based on that, because we're most reflective of a disorganized, self-hate, inferiority. So we have to do something for ourselves that only we can do for ourselves. But it still means we have to do it in a way that we're creating a humanism, an internationalism, a regard for every people, no anti-other peoples. We just pro us, and that's different.
Thank you very much. Netfa, tell me where people should go to find more out about Black Alliance for Peace and stuff like that.
And PACA. So the Black Alliance for Peace, again, the statement and all kind of other stuff is on blackallianceforpeace.com. Check out the statement there and our positions on what's happening in Venezuela and all that. And then PACA is you might not find anything here now, but in a few days, you're going to find our new website, pacapower.org. Will be a new website that we're launching. We have to redo our website.
All right. Thank you very much. Certainly appreciate it. We'll keep a view on what's happening in We'll keep a view on what's happening in Africa. We'll keep a view on what's happening in South America and Venezuela and Asia. They're putting Nazis back in power in
I
South
know.
America. They're fighting
Yeah,
over.
I want to talk to you about Ukraine. Well, we talked about it on one of your other shows, and this
But
whole
we can
thing.
talk about, oh, there's plenty to talk about that. You know, let me say this. If you think about it, they create these extremists, they create ISIS, and then they say they let ISIS loose. They create these Nazis in Ukraine, and then they let them loose. You know, they create these extremist groups. They fund them, they finance them. And then at some point, it wouldn't surprise me if they don't start saying, we've got to protect Europe from these Nazis in Ukraine. You know, at some point, they always create them. And then at some point in the future, they say, we have to come in and protect you from the Frankenstein monster that we created.
And there's a tie between the Ukraine forces and those terrorists in Mali. You know, there's some issues there that happen. So we're like, what's going on here? Well, get Ukraine to do what you don't want to do yourself.
They're using them for drones in Africa. And they're also using the Ukrainians, some of those weapons that are supposed to be going to Ukraine. Some of the African leaders have said these terrorists are showing up with these.
That's right.
So the United States, you know, are buying weapons that they say they're going to Ukraine, and they just ship them to terrorists, to ISIS, to whoever, Boko Haram. They end up in the hands of terrorists, and they claim they're going to Ukraine. So, you know, they just come up with an excuse. Well, thanks a lot, Netfa Freeman. And what about your show on WPFW?
Oh, Voices with Vision comes on every Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. Voices with Vision on WPFW 89.3 or live streamed on WPFWFM.org.
All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. That's Netfa Freedom. And we look forward to getting them back again soon. We're going to have, unfortunately, we got a lot of these things we got to talk about. Hey, everybody. Thanks for following me. Thanks for all my Patreon people and everybody that donates to the channel. And don't forget, I got a P.O. box there. If you want to do any snail mail to me, at the bottom of this thing is a P.O. box. And don't forget, the most important thing that everyone can do, since we are alternative media and we don't have any other way to push all the alternative media stuff, is share this on all your social media platforms. We're out.